Have you ever wondered why the New Testament is so happy and positive while the Old Testament seems to be completely opposite? Well, this week I'm going to be reading 5 of the darkest books I could find in the Bible to answer my biggest question. Why is God so harsh in the Old Testament?
Why was God so harsh on people in the Old Testament?
You know, my first reaction to that question is to say he wasn't. He wasn't as harsh as you think.
Listen to me, you fat cows living in Samaria. You have no idea what you're wishing for. It'll be dark and hopeless without a ray of joy or light. I think that's the thing I struggle the most with these books, is that it just seems so wrong. Like, it seems so unlike the God we know in the New Testament. I started with the book of Amos. It's a bit lighter than the rest of the 5 books, and I decided to save the darkest one for last. Did you know the book of Amos existed? Because I didn't for a long time. I don't know too much about it, but what I do know is that it's really dark and pretty harsh. I remember not loving it the last time I read it. I read most of this book on the floor in my room. A couple of times I went outside to get some fresh air and take a break, and then I went right back inside to continue reading. I also decided that while I read each of these stories, I'm not going to go on my phone at all while I read. I'm not going to check it, I'm not going to touch it, I don't even want to look at it. I'm trying to stay as focused on these stories as possible, and I know it's going to take me ages to read them if I stop every 5 seconds to scroll on my phone. Amos is all about God telling the Israelites all the horrible ways in which they're going to get punished for being sinful. It's mostly about how their nation is going to get taken over by other nations, and they're all going to be forced into captivity. It's one thing to punish them for their wrongdoings, but it's another to go on and on and on about it in the most intense and harsh way. After a while, I decided to Google my question to see if I could find my answer that way. And it said God did all of this because he loved his people. But if I'm being honest, that didn't really make any sense to me. Wouldn't he choose not to punish them because he loved them? By the end of the day, I was really ready to stop reading this book. I decided that it was close enough to the end to just let it go, and that I would start fresh the next morning with my next book. The book of Micah is especially harsh because it not only talks about all the punishments these people are gonna get, but also all the sinful things they did to deserve it. I decided to try and read some of this book outside. The temperature was really nice and I just wanted to get out of my room, but then it pretty quickly started raining on me and I had to rush right back inside. So Micah is specifically condemning the rulers of Israel. I think that's the root of where all of their sinfulness comes from, is the leaders not representing God well. They're all being really selfish and taking from the poor and not helping other people and just not imaging God in the way that they should. I'm for the first time kind of seeing a little bit more of how and why the Israelites somewhat deserve this punishment. And they're all going to be forced into captivity. I just came across this verse that says, "But you are the ones who hate good and love evil. You skin my people alive and tear their flesh from their bones." Okay, so here's my issue. I get it. I understand that these people are really bad, doing a lot of wrong things, and they deserve to be punished for that. If you sinned, something had to pay for it. That's the way the world worked back in the Old Testament before Jesus, and I understand that, but when I think about God in the New Testament, it's just so opposite from this Old Testament prophet era God. I'm just talking about his character, the person of who he is. If the God we know in the New Testament, so kind and merciful, how is that the same person in the Old Testament? And how can he be so kind and merciful if he did all these horrible things? I don't know. It feels wrong to even ask these questions, but it's also something that I know there's an explanation for it, and I know there's a reason, and I feel like I have to ask these questions in order to get there. Micah was a lot harder for me to read than Amos, and because of that, it was hard for me to even imagine how horrible the last book was gonna be. As you can tell, I was struggling a little bit, so I avoided reading more of this book for a while. I went on my phone, I went to the gym, I just did anything I could to avoid it. The whole time I was thinking about God's harshness and how it just didn't make any sense to me. At the end of this day, I felt even more confused than I did starting off. I had very few answers, and on top of that, I didn't even finish the book of Micah before going to bed. I was really hoping the next book would make more sense. The third book on my list is Obadiah, which in my opinion is even scarier than the last 2 books. But before I started reading, I decided I needed to do some research.
Also see God dealing with Israel in the same way a loving father deals with a child.
People think the God of the Old Testament and the New Testament are different gods. They're not.
But when the people who wrote the Bible pondered the mystery of God, they consistently describe God's character in this way.
I watched video after video just trying to get any kind of answer. I didn't get much, but what I did find was a verse. deep in the book of Exodus says that the Lord is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. Even though this didn't quite explain everything, it told me that I wasn't wrong. I started to really believe that there was an answer to my question. There's a reason he was as harsh as he was. There is an answer. I know there is. I'm not wrong. I just needed to figure out how. No matter how long it takes, I'm going to figure it out. So to me, Obadiah is especially harsh because it's one of the first books I read that isn't even about Israel. It's about the nation of Edom, which originally started from Esau way back in Genesis. Edom has always been in like somewhat opposition to Israel. There's a couple places throughout the Bible where they've butt heads. So Obadiah shows that God is over all nations, including the ones that are totally against Israel. However, he only seems to show up and show this side of his sovereignty when it's time to punish them. And that's what makes this book seem especially harsh to me. It's a pretty short book, but the entire thing is all talking about the grief Edom is gonna get for the horrible things they've done. And yes, I think they might deserve it, but it still doesn't sit right with me. Obadiah is really short, so I decided to read it a couple more times. During my second read through, I heard another buzzing on my phone. I accidentally had it sitting right next to me, which I had been trying not to do. I was so close to finishing Obadiah, so I forced myself to read every last sentence before I stopped to check my phone. Turns out it was just a group chat that was going off, nothing urgent, and I'm glad I didn't fully interrupt my reading just to check it. The next day, I started reading the book of Nahum, which was filled with quotes like this: "The Lord is a jealous God, filled with vengeance and rage." Something I never noticed when reading this book before was that there were a few good verses as well. Like, "The Lord is good, a strong refuge when trouble comes. He is close to those who trust in him." I think it's hard to see the good in a prophet book when the harsh verses seem to stand out more than the good ones. I had to take a long drive on this day, so while in the car, I decided to listen to some of Nahum. It's definitely something else to hear someone reading aloud all of the "you're doomed and your city is getting destroyed and darkness is coming." One good thing that came out of listening to it was that the word trust really stuck out to me a lot. He is close to those who trust in him. It seems like all God really wants of his people is just for them to trust him. I think he's kind of emphasizing how horrible and harsh all of this stuff is going to be in their future because he's trying to motivate them to just trust in him so that they don't have to experience it. Like, he's kind of being harsh because he's trying to protect them, if that makes sense. I felt like I kept uncovering little pieces to the answer of my question, but I still couldn't quite fit them together yet. After this, I felt ready to start my fifth and final book the next day. This is not only the harshest prophet book I could find, but it's also one of the longest too. It's Isaiah, and this is just a preview of how brutal it really is. "He will level all the high mountains and all the lofty hills. He will break down every high tower and every fortified wall. Human pride will be humbled and the human arrogance will be brought down." What makes it even worse is it's 66 chapters long, of passage after passage that sound just as brutal as those. There's a story in Isaiah where the king knows that Israel is about to get wiped out, and so he's looking for anything for help. He's reaching out to other nations, hoping for help from someone, but the whole time God is telling him, "Hey, just trust me, you don't need help from any other nation." All he wants is the trust of Israel and for Israel to rely on him alone. And I think that's a big reason why all the other nations start to fall, like Edom in the book of Obadiah. Like, he's trying to like prove it to them, like, I'm more trustworthy than even all these other nations because I'm over them too. This book took me several days to read. I read slowly, I kept off my phone, and I tried to study it as best I could. This was my last option to find the answer to my question, and I was so determined to figure it out before the end. It's clear that in Isaiah, God is upset that the people aren't imaging him in the way that they should. He gives them a ton of chances to turn to him and repent, but they never do it. And I understand now that because the Israelites never turned back to God and never took their chance to get out of it, these punishments are really what they deserve. And that was my answer. God gave his people a choice, rescue or punishment, and they chose punishment. Can you tell I was a little unsatisfied with that answer? I understood it, but I just really wanted there to be more to the story. I didn't want everything to end there. And as I continued reading through Isaiah, I found that God didn't want to end it there either. I think I'm like finally starting to understand some of this. I'm starting to get it. It's finally starting to click a little bit for me. You see, I really missed a lot when I skipped over the ending of Amos and Micah because both of those books end with a promise for restoration. Not only a restoration of their land, but also a restoration of their character. It's going to soften their hearts and make them much more reliant on God. Their pain from all this suffering will actually turn into something good. I talked a lot about what the Israelites deserved throughout this video, but that's something they really don't deserve. But throughout Isaiah, there's many mentions of this servant that's going to come eventually, which obviously we know is going to be Jesus. Just a normal, humble guy who's going to take all of that suffering, all the harsh, horrible things that fill these dark prophet books, and he's going to suffer through it himself. There will be a hope for an eternity where all the suffering in these prophet books and all the suffering in life in general will come to an end. It's so compassionate and gracious and kind, and it's all done because God loved his people. And although it can be hard to see, the God in the Old Testament is the exact same God in the New Testament too.
And all that in the Old Testament was preparation to show how wrathful and how true, glorious God is and how terrible sin is. And now you're getting Jesus, who is mercy incarnate, open-heartedness incarnate, saying, this is what's available for you.